The church is right now going through a very, very difficult transition. And there is a threat to older adults. There is a threat to our young people. And what we need to be doing is exactly what Digital Church Network is doing. We need people, everybody that's connected to Christendom, whether you're a seminary, whether you're a denomination, whatever it is that you do, everybody needs to find ways and means to collaborate and ask themselves the question, how are we going to survive?
Welcome to the Church Digital Podcast. Through this podcast, we'll talk about the technological innovations within the church. But more than tech for tech itself, we'll address deeper questions. Is disciple making possible digitally? How should we approach the digital mission field? Can a biblically grounded church operate in digital space? Oh, and where does the metaverse fit into all this? Whether you're a big or small church, an established church or a startup church plant, the Church Digital's goal is to help churches like yours learn to be a multiplying church, digitally and physically. Our heart, that churches like yours would discover a newfound focus on disciple making that will revolutionize your church. And now, here's your host, Jeff Reed.
Hey, welcome to the Church Digital Podcast. This is Jeff Reed, founder of the Church Digital Church Network, Leadership Network, working with Metaverse Church Next, all sorts of fun stuff. I could just sit here rattling off the opportunities left and right, but it is a pleasure to be here with you for episode 223. And I'm excited about this episode. It's not often when you meet people. Listen, as crazy as we talk about this idea of digital church and metaverse church, there are plenty of critics. There are plenty of people who say, yeah, hey, this isn't a real thing. This isn't a valid thing. Hey, Jeff, what you're doing is actually sin, taking people out of the bride of Christ. Yeah, that was actually a conversation. That was pre-COVID, of course. But the heart of this really today is a conversation with somebody who's like, hey, there's something here. And I, honestly, anytime somebody's like, hey, you may be right, I just want to have put them on the podcast, because that means like, hey, let's actually celebrate that somebody else is actually thinking the same thing that we are. And even in this conversation, having this conversation publicly. And so we're going to dig in a little bit here into Digital Church Network and the FAM, the online community that we've created as a result of it. And so if you've not checked into FAM, if you haven't seen what's happening there, here's what I want you to do. Go to digitalchurch.network/join-FAM. digitalchurch.network/join-FAM, F-A-M. Here's where your ability to create a free account for FAM, our online community, where we're resourcing, where we're helping, we're coaching. We are caring for church innovators, church people that are thinking outside of the box, whether you're planting a church or whether you're wrestling with digital discipleship and what that could look like in your physical church, in your digital church, in your metaverse church, in your, fill in the blank church, whatever you got. Like, this is the place where we're bringing the crazies together. And I've said it so often, a crazy person by themselves is crazy. A crazy people gathered together with other crazy people, well, that's a force to be reckoned with. And that's what we're aiming for here with FAM, is to gather together the crazies, help them convince other people they need to be crazy too. And so, which even gets a little bit into this conversation, because we may have met a new crazy person here in this conversation. And so we're bringing into it here Leonardo Blair. So Leonardo, thank you very much for jumping onto the podcast here.
It's my pleasure, Jeff. My pleasure.
So Leonardo is a writer, is a senior features reporter. That's the official title. I had butchered it earlier, and Leonardo corrected me. But he writes for Christian Post, and so I had the honor at some point of connecting with Leonardo, because he started asking some questions about digital churches, and actually wrote an incredible, a very long, detailed article about the idea of digital expressions of church and metaverse expressions of church without buildings. And to my knowledge, at this point, this is the most detailed article I have seen on the idea of digital and metaverse church. And so talking with him, obviously there was an immediate connection, and it connected him with Chesley Lundy, co-founder of DCN, and some others. And so Leonardo, man, it's exciting. Just even that you were seeing some of this stuff and excited about it. But I would love to maybe unpack some of this, learn a little bit more about you, and let you even share a little bit of what you're seeing and some of what you learned as you were writing through this article. Does that sound good?
For sure.
Awesome. Hey, so even just to get started, how did you get into journalism? How'd you get connected with the Christian Post? Like tell us a little bit of that story.
Yeah, no. So my long-term goal is to become a famous writer. When I was in high school, I studied these amazing 18th century writers like Nathaniel Hawthorne, those types of writers. And I always kind of, looked at these guys as really, really smart people. And I studied their backgrounds and found that many of them started out as journalists. So journalism is sort of like, for me, a practical way to write until you get to that stage where you're able to sort of, live on your creativity. So that's kind of what the initial plan was. But I'm a very curious person. I'm interested in everything from business to science to math, you name it. That's me. So I studied media in undergrad, and then went to Columbia afterwards to study investigative journalism. And I was, I was doing it for a while, and I left and started doing communications, like, international relations. And then the Lord actually called me back and, said, you needed to come back to journalism. And he led me to the Christian Post. So that's kind of how I got connected, through a dream.
Are you exclusively writing for Christian Post? Do you write for other sources at the same time? Like what does that look like?
Listen, the work that we do at the Christian Post is so vast. There is so much work to do. There's so much analysis. I mean, every single day. I mean, the work is never done. So yes, I write exclusively for the Christian Post.
Awesome. Now, do you consider, like, you wrote an article about planting churches in digital and metaverse space? Like, this is a radical concept. It's fun. It's cool. We talk about it all the time here. But, like, do you consider yourself technological, like a technology type guy? Where did this idea come from? Like, how did you end up being a writer talking about this really bleeding edge concept?
Yeah, I mean, so as somebody who is a trained investigative journalist, I love data. So I've been tracking data on the church for a long time. In 2019, I wrote a story about internet pastors. We were tracking all this information about, the church membership going down. But I noticed that, if you look at, some of the internet preachers, they would have millions of people following them while, the church membership was going down. So I started that conversation in 2019, did a report, and, listened to, these younger personalities talk about how, when they started out, they were rejected. Pastors didn't want to, let them come speak in their church, but they had this audience and they had the ear of people who were looking for something more. And, shortly after that, I think about a year or maybe 9 months after I did that article, COVID hit. And, that data, started showing how quickly pastors started to pivot. So everybody who was, I don't want a Facebook page, this, tech is demonic or whatever it is, everybody went into survival mode and they started paying attention to what was happening online.
Yeah, I just pulled the article on the internet preachers, and so we've got links to that in the show notes. And yeah, that was June 24th, 2019. So that's 9 months away from, the end of the world there in March 2020. And it's interesting to me how I was even reflecting back and joking earlier. Like I had a good friend who was a pastor in my life. Basically, December 2019, called me up and was like, "Hey Jesus, or hey Jeff, stop sinning. You need to confess the sin in your life and stop taking people out of the bride of Christ by doing, these digital churches. You need to, and basically it was digital church equals sin. Confess that sin and remove it from your life." And this was a friend of mine. We grew up together, and so it's like, "Hey, I don't know that I agree with you." And what was interesting was I didn't hear from that guy for about 3 or 4 months until sometime around that March 16th when the end of the world came, and he was like, "Hey Jeff, can you help us? Our buildings are shut down. Can you help us start to broadcast those services so we can do church digitally?" And I did. I kind of maybe rubbed it in his face a little bit. Sent him an invoice for the time, but certainly able to help through it. Hey, so you were looking at some of this stuff, pre-COVID, wrestling with this. COVID hits, and so now you're seeing this rush of everybody doing things digitally. We're coming out of the COVID season, wherever you think we are in this model, and now you're discovering maybe this new model, this new paradigm of church. Like, how did you progress from internet pastors doing this stuff, and how did that grow and evolve to writing an article about metaverse and virtual reality, and a lot of this is what you're getting into the second article. So kind of walk me through the story of how you got to the story.
Yeah, COVID actually disrupted everyone. And so because the Christian Post is a digital publication, like we started out as digital. So we're digital natives basically. So while everybody else was scrambling, we were already comfortable in that space. And I was listening to different pastors talk. I was doing research. I found DJ Soto's church, the VR church, and I listened to I can't remember her name, but she has a church down in Florida, and she works for Facebook. She was also on a podcast as well.
Yeah, Nona Jones,
right. So they were having this conversation about how the metaverse, the meta church is going to replace the mega church, and I started digging into that a little bit, and then I just simply started connecting the data from research companies like Barna, Pew, and just my own personal experience, just reporting on story after story of churches shutting down, churches that could no longer sustain themselves. And that was sort of worrying to me, trying to think about the future. How will the church survive? So that's how I got into it.
Yeah, that was a great podcast with Nona Jones, Carrie Newhoff podcast, I'm pretty sure, with Nona and DJ. And DJ's been a friend. He's been on this podcast a lot, and he's talked about how a lot of attention really came onto what he's been doing, through COVID, but even amplified by COVID. The announcement of Meta becoming the new name of Facebook, and the video of Zuckerberg. I think Zuckerberg did a live broadcast, I think November, maybe 2021, talking about the change of the name from Facebook to Meta to be the umbrella company. Even Life Church, which was their announcement that they were doing Metaverse church services, which was the largest church, at the time, even to this point, it's the largest church that's actually doing something in the Metaverse. I can remember with the Zuckerberg, I saw traffic on the website on the Church Digital increase about 5 times. We had a 5x increase just with that announcement as everybody started searching. Oh, what is this Metaverse thing that Zuckerberg's talking about? What does church look like in that space? And then it was funny. I was actually on jury duty the week that Life Church made their announcement, and traffic on the website blew up 10 times, even more on top of, just because everybody was searching for more information about what this could look like. And it's interesting how there's a lot of interest centered around this idea of digital and metaverse churches, social media churches, streaming churches, and what this looks like. I'm just curious, as what you've done with Christian Post and the publishing of that, how has this been received? What has been some of the response from people kind of digging into what this looks like?
Yeah, I think it has started a very, very big conversation. I have done several radio morning shows on this topic. People who are interested in knowing more about how the metaverse works. So it's. I failed to mention it, and it's when I got into reporting on this subject as well. A part of it came from me interviewing pastors. Like during COVID, I was talking to different pastors, and we were always tracking, okay, when are the churches going to open up? When are churches going to open up? And I'm not going to name the pastor who said this to me. He has one of the largest churches in the country. And he said to me, people are comfortable. They don't want to come back to church. They like online church. That's basically what he said to me. They like online church. And I was going to make that into a headline, but I said, you know what? I don't want people to think I'm trying to destroy the church. But I think people have sort of adapted way more than the church leadership think they have. I was looking also at another study from Barna that talked about the Black church specifically, and they mentioned that Black Christians were more comfortable with a hybrid model. The same way people prefer having a hybrid model of work right now. So I feel like we're some people might be sitting back waiting for the past or the pre-COVID dynamic to return. But I don't think, based on the data that we've been seeing, that it's going to come back. It's something different.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We talk about that. I'm just curious. The pastor that was like, people aren't coming back, they like the online. He said that in a negative context. I'm assuming, right? It wasn't, yay, people aren't coming back. Like he was perceiving it negative.
I'm not. I wouldn't say it was negative, because this pastor is very smart, and he is, he's very flexible. He has a good team. So I think he was just acknowledging the transition that was taking place.
Good for him. If he was assuming it was positive, or seeing it as an opportunity instead of a threat. And that's really a lot of the challenge. I feel that, excuse me, that people are seeing it more as a threat to the normality of what was, and that the only healthy model of a church is one that's existing in physical space that meets every Sunday at 9 a.m. Which by the way is arguably a product to be consumed the same way that online broadcast is a consumed product. And if that's the only thing that we're doing to make a disciple, well, then that's really maybe a larger issue. That's not just about digital. I think it's about physical as well. And my hope is, coming through this COVID season, that churches would learn that what we're called to do and how to be effective to do ministry in 2020 to reach people and to disciple people here in the 2020s, even post-COVID. Like, it's more than just the 1 hour on Sunday. And hopefully, whether it's, and I don't even care if it's physical, if it's digital, like the technology is just tools in the same way that the brick and mortar building is a tool. But we've got to do more than just the service. And this is really why I loved, your article, because you delved into the exposure of what these digital churches are doing beyond Sunday, and how that's effective in helping to create these disciples and to even leverage and multiply what's happening in the churches. Are you, like, in general, what were the people you were talking with? Were they like this, the the response, kind of the feedback around the article here with digital churches. When you're on these talk shows in the morning, and when you're doing the press tour, I know that you get through with some of the topics like this. Are people supportive? Are they negative? Are they understanding? Are they skeptics? Like, kind of, what's been the posture of people as you're talking with them in general about this?
I think there's a little bit of fear and excitement mixed together, but there is the tone is very sober, because I think the data that we've presented with the trend that we have observed is the numbers don't lie. Numbers don't lie. So just yesterday, another church I reported on, a 206-year-old church that had to shut down because the members were older, and they just could not attract the young people. So this is a church that survived world wars, survived pandemics before, went through so many changes, and they just could not survive this period. So there is a massive shift that has taken place that many churches in the last few months I've reported, and it's not just the century-year-old churches that are shutting down. You have churches, like the Potter's House in Denver, they had this large campus and they shut down and shifted to digital. So I think a lot of leaders are looking at the cost benefit analysis, and they're also looking at, the realities of, how they can still do church without, worrying about the overheads of a large building.
Yes. Oh, so much yes there. It's funny. I was actually just talking about the Potter's House with somebody yesterday, and honestly celebrating that as a model. Most people, I remember when that was announced late last year, that they were transitioning away from the building and going to a digital only model. Like there was criticism for them in some circles that they were giving up, and it's the people that are saying that you can't do discipleship. The relationships are not real. It's the negative people in those contexts. But what's interesting is we're and you're highlighting some of these stories, Leonardo, where we're finding that you can, and it is. And it looks different. And the Potter's House in Denver is going to look different than the Potter's House. The other, it's in Dallas, right? That's where the main campus is.
Yes, the main campus.
Yeah. And so, like, things are going to be different between these two, and that might be an interesting, podcasting conversation in its own, exploring the one campus versus another, and how they behave, how they react, how they're connecting, what some of their strategies are. But in those differences, honestly, come strengths and opportunities by doing a different thing in digital space. And this is the thing that I love about digital churches. By doing digital differently than how physical church is, we have the opportunity to reach a different person digitally than we're reaching in the physical. And a lot of these virtual reality churches, DJ Soto, Jason Poling, Cornerstone VR, VR Tiger with Oasis Church, which we talked about a little bit here on the podcast. These guys are reaching different people than the people that are coming into the buildings. And it's a beautiful thing as you start to realize that the differences make them unique, which makes them effective, as opposed to just carbon copying the same type of thing over and over again to reach those types of people that, let's be honest, the majority of people in 2022, America at least, are not interested in coming to the brick and mortar building. We've got to do different things to reach a different type of person. Have you? I'm just curious, and because this idea is just fresh in my head. Have you had any connection with Potter's House and some of those people, like how that transition has gone? Have you had any conversations over there?
I think I need to follow up. That's going to be a part of the future discussion, the future transition. I think I also mentioned Willow Creek, Dave Dummett. He raised this. He took over that church during the pandemic, and he had to cut staff recently because the numbers just weren't there. They can't financially sustain that church anymore because the people are not coming back. So
as we're seeing more and more, it's interesting, even falling back to your church that launched in 1815, if it's a 206-year-old church that shut down. I think there's coming a season soon where we're going to see digital next churches. Not churches that are launching first in digital. We saw that earlier in COVID. Nuvo Church, City Center Church in California. There were lots of churches that launched first digitally and then went physical. We're seeing digital only churches like Lux Digital and Barbecue Church and so many metaverse churches as well. But I think they were going to see this model of digital next, where churches can't justify the building. They can't justify the large staff. They're going to have to lean into a more scalable approach of digital. It's interesting. We've talked about Barna. Kinnaman, was the guy who had said in COVID, I forget the exact stat. It's been a minute since I quoted it, but he was predicting, 25% of church closures, I think by 2023. Like it was a very drastic number. And I, even when he said it, I was like, I like the stat. I agree with the mindset. I think it's too quick because I think people are going to scramble. They're going to hold on. They're going to squeeze every last dime because they don't want to give up on the dream of the church, at least in the physical space, not realizing that maybe some forward-thinking people can extend their ministry and maybe even propel their ministry into a different environment by engaging and doing it digitally. Potter House is a great example of that. Hey, we can't afford this giant building. We can't afford the staffing and the infrastructures because of just the difficulties and the complexities of doing church in Denver. I was just in Denver last week. It's a very expensive city. But if we can engage digitally and start to pull some of that in, if we can extend the reach of this, scale down how much all of this costs, and instead maybe reach different people than the other physical locations are, maybe even outside of Denver. Oh my gosh, there's incredible potential. It just takes people, it takes planters, it takes pastors to imagine some things and do some things differently with that. That's so good.
Yeah, but I also think one of the challenges for churches today is that if you look at the same data from Barna and Pew and so on, that their most ardent supporters are older adults. Like the older you are, that's where the market is, and a lot of this audience does not have the technological skills to probably sustain themselves in a digital church environment. So I know that here in New York City, where I am, there are tons and tons of free classes for older adults where you can go and train and get introduced to, this kind of, system or help. Maybe what the churches could do is, while they're transitioning, they start offering some free classes, like connect with their local government officials, because it's not something that's going away. It's something that's coming, and it's going to continue to increase, right? This event that I'm going to after I'm finished with this interview, it's talking about the digital identity in Web3, right? So there's going to be this convergence because we all have like different passwords for all these different apps. The next level is, okay, you're going to have this digital you that is going to be recognizable across all platforms. So that's what people are working on right now. So I think if the church is going to be helpful and future-proof and forward-thinking, then the church is going to have to do more than just, let me start a Facebook page. Let me start, this or that. You're going to have to be a part of the transition. You're going to have to help people so that they're not left behind. Because all these churches that are shutting down, I haven't heard anybody talk about, where are these older adults going to go?
That's a great perspective. It's interesting. That actually reminds me. I was when COVID was coming across, I was actually working for a physical church down here in Miami, Florida, and they had a it's let's call it an older audience. You know, it's a little more on the older side of Miami, and so the church was doing honestly incredible digital things. But it was reaching a different type of person than the people that were attending in the physical building. And the week that we saw COVID coming, and literally, like, we're here in Miami, and if you remember, Asia was getting hit, China, and there was that over the weekend we saw it hit California. Or actually, Seattle was first, and then it came down to California. And like across that week, we could literally see it hitting state, time zone, coming towards the East Coast. And I remember just being in leadership meetings with the senior leadership with the church, and I was like, we need to run workshops around the clock, educating as many people in the church on how to download the mobile app, how to use the mobile app, how to do online giving. Like, our problem is that we need to educate a classification of people. We have the tools, we have the knowledge, we have the resources. Our specific problem was the people we were targeting didn't know how to use them, because they never had to, because they would come to the building, and the buildings, March were shutting down. And I think you give a great point there. And I would even add to that, Leonardo, and I've talked about on the podcast before, my mom's 70 something. I'm not allowed to say the age publicly. She's asked me not to. But the heart of it is my mom leads like 2 or 3 online small groups. My mom's led online small groups for years. Has multiple relationships, multiple groups. Some of the stuff that she's doing in digital ministry is phenomenal. My mom struggles to print every couple of weeks and still doesn't really understand how to utilize the remote control. So, like, it's not that she's a technological wizard in what she's doing. I'm adopted. And so, like, the genetics don't pass from mom to me. But the heart of this really is she sees the potential of reaching and discipling these people. When I convinced my mom, I was actually a digital pastor that recruited my mom to start teaching online small groups. And it wasn't, hey, mom, there's this new technology. Hey, mom, you get to stare at people face to face from around the country. It was, hey, mom, she was a retired business professional. Hey, mom, I've got a lawyer, a girl studying to be a lawyer. I've got a girl studying to be a doctor. I've got a girl that's operating currently as a CPA. She's getting her CPA certifications. So I've got 3 women, mid-20s, young professionals. They need mentoring. They need discipleship. You want to take a crack at it? And it wasn't the technology. It was a ministry that wooed my mom over. And to the point, that's what she's doing now. It's interesting. One of the small groups that she's actually leading is it's 4 women my mom's age. So it's 4 women in their 60s and 70s. And it's the 4 daughters of the 4 women. Now, what's interesting is the 4 daughters are mixed in age, and they're scattered all over the country. So it's 4 moms in Miami and 4 daughters scattered all over. But what's happening is when these women gather together, the mothers and the daughters, really the only time they're connecting through the span of the weeks and months is in my mom's Bible study, where they're talking about the Bible. So the thing that brings these mothers and daughters together is literally the Word of God. And this is something that you can never do in a physical. Only because these women, these daughters are scattered all over the country. You're not going to get them in the same space. But you're able to foster those relationships, build a community, strengthen the mother-daughter bond, all centered around the gospel and the Bible. Like, it's this beautiful concept. And what's fascinating is I asked my mom one day, I was like, this is the best idea I've ever heard for an online small group. Like, I tell everybody and their mother about this. And I was like, hey, mom, where'd you come up with this? And she's like, oh, I just prayed about it and God kind of brought it to mind. And I'm like, tell God you need to pray more, because like this is really good stuff. But there's a potential to go beyond really what these buildings are for people that have imagination. And that imagination might even extend the reach of the church in, I'm hearing words like recession. I know there's economic issues. I'm paying way too much for gas. Like, the writing's on the wall. We're going to need to pivot. We're going to need to shift. And digital is a completely viable option for that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I'm working on a piece right now that I'm going to have to finish tomorrow, where this pastor was offering gas cards to help people to come to church because the gas is so high. People worry about the distance they have to travel to go to church. I think also that the idea about your mom is amazing because churches can identify people like your mom who are among their congregation to be ambassadors to help spread the gospel through technology, to help spread the gospel to members who might be stubborn, who might be resistant to the change or the shift, to and connect. And I one of the reasons why I a lot of this feels a little bit seamless to me is, prior to coming to the Christian Post, I worked on a project in New York City called Age Friendly New York City. So we were tracking all this data that showed that by 2030, they would have more older adults in America than, children 18 or younger, something to that effect. So we were preparing for the preponderance of older adults in the city. We're trying to make things more accessible, and we worked with an organization called Older Adults Technology Services. So we were doing a lot of research and going through and making sure that businesses, schools, colleges, that they were prepared to serve this market and to help them transition to live better lives. And churches need to be a part of this. Churches have to be a part of this. We have to keep older adults connected, right? And that's where I think a lot of these churches with resources, if you are going to be future proof, if you want to survive, you have to stay connected to the people who are your most ardent supporters, and then find ways to make the transition an intergenerational movement, because that is going to be key. And that's one of the things that we talked about in that Age Friendly New York City project, was to get older adults to connect more with younger people, because not every older adult has a child, not every older adult has grandkids that they are interacting with every day to help them to stay connected to where the future is trending. So, and that's where churches, I think churches can play a very critical role at this point.
Yeah, I love it. It's interesting. You used the word ambassador. I believe we've talked in church planning circles. It's the person of peace. Find the person that's familiar with the community that you want to get involved with, and I mean, there's the whole biblical. You can unpack that, but in digital space, we talk about finding that person of peace, maybe like in your church, to get you exposed into new areas. Like Cornerstone Church, Yuba City, Jason Poling was, to my knowledge, he was the first pastor to lead a physical church as well as a metaverse church at the same time. DJ's been doing it a long time longer, but he was only virtual reality. He was not physical. Jason, I believe, at least nobody's proved me otherwise, Jason was the first to do both. And it's interesting, Jason's story about how he got into the metaverse. Jason didn't even know how to spell VR. Like, he had no understanding whatsoever. And two people, like in his church, one of his elder board and one of his key volunteers, came up to him and said, "Hey, we want to help you get into the metaverse. We want to help launch a church in the metaverse." And Jason went from buying a headset to launching a church in the metaverse in months. Like, it was like 6 to 8 months, I believe. Very quick turnaround. But because he had the person of peace, he had the ambassadors to really start to expand ideas and get into different areas. And a lot of people, they're like, we don't really understand, they try broadcasting the services and which is nice. because that's like the physical example of what church is. Hey, let's broadcast the services that 1 hour on Sunday, and maybe we'll open up some chat. Like that's the closest to what physical church is, I guess, in digital context. But really, when we get people that understand like how digital works, understand how metaverse works, when we find these persons of peace, maybe they start to expose us to some new ideas, and they have maybe a larger imagination for what could be, even beyond what we as pastors and ministers have. And all of a sudden we're understanding that, man, we're getting exposed, or the options here is going to expose us more within these platforms, more within these communities than we could before. Like, you know, I mentioned earlier, and I know Andre was one of the guys that was mentioned in your article. Barbecue church is a thing. I remember the first time Andre told me about this church, and I'm like, that's either the stupid. I told him, I was like, that's either the stupidest or the most ingenious idea I ever heard. But you have to do it because his passion is going to connect him with people that would not otherwise be connected, and it could bridge over into something more. And so we're seeing time and time again that even finding persons of peace in the barbecue community and how that feeds into connecting people into Jesus in a discipleship process that's multiplying. Like this, it seems silly, but we're finding that these persons of pieces, even in unique communities like barbecue, are giving opportunities for people to engage in a church that they would not otherwise engage in.
Yeah, one of the things I really, really like, just you bringing up Cornerstone, Yuba City, and just talking about Barbecue Church. I remember when we were doing that interview, we talked about the unshackling of the gospel and what the disruption of the digital technology has done. You know, people need to really open up their minds and understand that the gospel is not just one thing. Like it's the power, right? But it can be served in so many different ways by so many different people. And Chesley talked about the new wine, about this digital church transformation is a bit like new wine. And people are just going to have to try to connect the word to that movement. And I was like, I love the fact that you brought up Cornerstone Church, Yuba City, and you pointed out the distinction between churches who are just trying something. They're just streaming the service in sort of a generic VR room, right? At Cornerstone, they have, I looked at their website, they have a dedicated team, right, that is focused on the VR church. And when you go there, it feels so engaging. There's a sanctuary, you worship there, and then they move you across to this, outdoor world where the avatar of the pastor actually speaks and connects, and it feels like a real church. It comes with the same intimidation that you might feel if you're a shy person, of going somewhere you don't know anyone and you're going to have a conversation. So I really think that people need to just acknowledge that there is a tremendous transition taking place right now, and try to learn, because if you refuse to learn, you're only going to be harming yourself.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, it's let's go with the goers. That's a phrase that I say a lot. Those that are experimenting, we're going to go with them, and we're going to help them on the journey, because not a lot of people are helping them on their journey. Let's just be honest. But the heart of this is that when we talk about the theology of the metaverse, virtual reality, the ecclesiology, how this works, is God approving of this? Is God not? I don't know. Like, I'm just going to be honest right here on this podcast. I feel like God's approving. I feel like I'm seeing God working through these situations. And when I talk with people in the midst of it, like we agree that we're seeing God move. But I will stand before God one day, and I will either apologize for offending him with some of the stuff that we're doing, or hopefully hear, "Well done and good and faithful servant," by helping others try to think outside the box. I don't want to invalidate what's happening in this physical space as much as encourage the experimenters to experiment today so that we can learn tomorrow. It's interesting. I was on another show just talking about this, but the printing press, Gutenberg was actually criticized. The printing press was considered satanic at the time because well-meaning scribes who would sit in these rooms and write by hand the scriptures day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year. The printing press basically made them useless. They invalidated their existence. They were unemployed. And many people at the time of the printing press were like heretic on Gutenberg and his invention. Now, I mean, 2020, like, that's ridiculous. No one believes that Gutenberg was used by Satan in that moment. As a matter of fact, many people would cite him as the part of one of the first revivals, one of the largest biblical revolutions, not biblical, but Christian revolutions in relative modern era. And so, like, the idea that it's satanic, that it's a heretic, that's weird. It's interesting. Like, even Helen Keller said this quote before: "Today's heresy is tomorrow's orthodoxy. What we consider heretical today is going to be quite accepted tomorrow." And I do believe that in the digital and metaverse space. I think that we're very much on the bleeding edge. Leonardo, some of the stuff that you've talked about, some of the stuff that we're doing within DCN that was highlighted in that article. It's borderline heretical by common standards today. But when you actually not look at heresy outside of the biblical, but actually look at what the Bible is saying, I don't really think we are. I think this is another example of Gutenberg's press, where the expectations are of one thing, but the reality of what the Bible calls us to do is another. And we're actually following that in these digital and metaverse churches. So stay tuned. Hey, let me ask this. What do you, and I just kind of went off on a diatribe right there. Let me ask you the question. Where do you see the church going in 5 years? Like, what do you think the future is going to hold as we're looking at more of these digital and metaverse expressions of church, internet pastors, a lot of the stuff that you've been brainstorming? What do you think 2030 looks like?
I think I'm glad that you touched on Digital Church Network. I'm glad that there is a network like Digital Church Network, because it actually tells me that there is a collective group of people who are actually thinking about the future. And I feel like, there's so many churches across the country there, that have their tentacles connected to local governments and all this work. I think there are, if the church wants to survive, if the church wants to, not have one lost sheep out there, because we got to remember that, Jesus left the 99 and went to search for the one sheep. The church is right now going through a very, very difficult transition. And there is a threat to older adults. There is a threat to our young people. And what we need to be doing is exactly what Digital Church Network is doing. We need people, everybody that's connected to Christendom, whether you're a seminary, whether you're a denomination, whatever it is that you do. Everybody needs to find ways and means to collaborate and ask themselves the question, how are we going to survive? Because we cannot. I don't think we can adopt a capitalistic mindset to the church by saying, okay, if you want to get left behind, that's your problem, or we're just going to go. We have to keep talking. We have to keep pushing until they hear. Preach and preach and preach. You have new wine. DCN has been given the new wine, right? A lot of the other players, the younger folks, have been given this new wine. Now it is up to us to do what we must to make sure that everybody that needs to survive, some people, we're going to have to take them by force, because the truth is churches are shutting down and a lot of people no longer have church homes. COVID decimated a lot of congregations, even with the paycheck protection and all that effort to save them. They still lost, right? So we're going to have to figure out creative ways to connect, and it's happening online, right? We need those old mothers, we need those old fathers, we need everybody, because we can't have, just people who are entertaining, because the church is not just about entertainment. The church is about worship. The church is about, saving people. And that's that. There's a lot of saving that needs to be done right now. A lot of saving. The young people are in trouble. The old people are in trouble. So DCN, listen, I'm glad you had that Metaverse Church Summit. It's the start of a conversation, but we need to be doing more, because we need Barna, we need Pew, we need everybody who is connected to tracking the church to come together and say, hey, we have a problem. Are we in this to keep people saved and spread the gospel to others who need it? Or are we just thinking about dollar signs, right? God, I really believe that if God has given a purpose to people who know, like, you have this knowledge, you've been in the trenches for a long time, Jeff. You have been preaching this gospel for a long time. Noah was building that ark for a long time and warning people, hey, it's gonna rain, it's gonna rain, it's gonna rain. And nobody believed him, right? Until the flood came. So there is a flood right now, and people might, because we're all so siloed into our individual bubbles, we don't see it, but I'm seeing it every single day because I have a bird's eye view. I'm staring at the data as a journalist every single day, and it's scary. It's really, really scary. So yeah, the future is what I believe. I don't want to preach gloom and doom. I believe that if we believe that God is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we can ask or think, the future is in our hands. The future is going to be what we make of it. And so pastors are going to need to stand up. Seminary leaders are going to need to stand up. Denominational, heads are going to need to stand up and say, hey, how are we going to do this? How are we going to keep, the church together? And there's a way to do it that we've been talking about.
That's beautiful. Thank you for the encouragement. I think that it's been an honor through DCN, and I love the fact that you featured Chesley and I in the article as much as you did. Like, just that meant a lot. And it's funny. My friends, the Noah example, my friends in March 2020, they actually called me Noah. It's funny. I still have some of those tweets saved because it's like, hey, this is your season. You were talking about this for so long, and it was such a rough journey, to be honest. But coming out of this, it was the validation where we're seeing it. We're seeing that this model works. Yeah, it's different, but different isn't bad. Different gets different results, and it reaches different people, which is what we're learning time and time again, even as we're looking at more of these expressions of digital churches. But thank you for taking the time, for seeing opportunities, for looking at that data, and being one of these guys talking from the rooftops. So we need more of you, and it's interesting that Metaverse Church Summit, that brought a lot of speaking opportunities for me as well, a lot of radio news sources, other articles, and God bless even Leadership Network and some of their forward thinking on a lot of this Metaverse Church stuff, just to try to challenge preconceived norms. And the heart of all of this is just that. We don't want to say anything's bad. I really don't think the brick and mortar is bad. I think the brick and mortar is necessary to reach a different type of person. But if we're trying to complete the Great Commission and we think that the building is the one that's going to get it there, I have some serious issues with that, especially given the recession we're walking into and other things, because I know what that does to economies. And I'm not sure the brick and mortar is going to be the effective model or the only model that's going to be effective moving forward. And so you bringing light to that has been awesome. So thank you for that. Hey, as we're gonna land the plane, but as we're wrapping up here, Leonardo, any closing thoughts?
Let's do this together. That's my closing thought. I really believe that the church is going to have to work together, everybody, and listen to the people with the new wine. Listen to the people who are telling you numbers don't lie. Pay attention to the data. Churches are closing. It is unsustainable. Even if you love your church, if the young people aren't there to do the work, to do the ministries that you want to do, if they're not going to be there to pay the tithe and however it is that you gain income to sustain the church, then you're going to have to get back to the drawing board and do something new.
Incredible. So hey, you can see Leonardo Blair over on christianpost.com. And so definitely check out his articles. We'll put a couple links in the show notes, the ones we talked about. Leonardo, if anybody else is interested in keeping up with you, what are the best ways to reach out or to connect?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Leo Blair, and the information is there on christianpost.com. My handles are all there with my bio under all my stories. So yeah.
Perfect. So follow the link in the show notes and you'll get there. And that sounds like a plan. So Leonardo, thank you for being our guest and jumping on the podcast. But we're going to wrap up. For Leonardo, this is Jeff with Digital Church Network, the Church Digital Leadership Network, and a bunch of other fun stuff. Thanks for jumping on the podcast here. And we'll see you next time on the show. You all have a good day.